You walk with the feeling that life is always one step behind you, as if you were trying to catch your own pace, but it keeps walking ahead, never stopping. And maybe the worst part isn't the world out there. Maybe it's the noise in here. The mind spinning, 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 until every decision turns into a labyrinth. Come with me for a moment. If today you had to choose just one thing, only one, would you trust yourself? Imagine the scene. Morning, a mirror, cold light, and you looking at yourself as if you were evaluating a stranger. Some people don't say good morning to themselves. They say, hold on. They say, survive. They say, just one more day. And even if your mind drifted for a second, notice this. When you look at yourself, do you welcome yourself or do you accuse yourself? Because this is where the invisible script begins, the one you repeat without noticing. Overthinking feels like intelligence until it becomes punishment. You rehearse 10 versions of a conversation that never happened. You imagine 3 tragedies for every good possibility. And in the end, you don't choose. And when you don't choose, you call it destiny. But it's just mental exhaustion wearing a mask. Maybe now you can see it. It's not a lack of ability. It's excess internal weight. And internal weight drains money, drains love, drains energy, because you spend your life paying emotional interest. There is a cruel detail most people don't notice. Life starts obeying the way you describe yourself. You don't attract things with beautiful phrases. You attract with repeated frequency, with what you whisper to yourself when no one is listening. You say inside, this won't work, and your body begins to live like someone who already lost. Smaller posture, delayed decisions, ignored opportunities, postponed courage. Come back with me. Think of one day when you felt light, just one. On that day, things seemed to fall into place more easily, didn't they? It wasn't magic. It was you without the weight. Now this is the turning point, still inside the pain. You don't need to believe in anything grand today. Not in the universe, not in promises, not in theories. You only need to test one small truth. Every time you change what you repeat inside, you change what you allow outside. And it begins in the most humble way possible, with a sentence that isn't motivation, it's direction. Instead of I can't, you try not yet. Not yet. That's how a trapped mind begins to unlock its own door. There is a strange moment. It isn't sharp pain, nor clear hope. It is a heavy silence. You keep functioning. You work, you answer, you move, but inside, something is suspended, as if life were in standby mode. And maybe now you recognize it. It isn't declared sadness, it is the absence of meaning. This is the point where many people distract themselves so they don't have to feel. But today, you stayed. We learned that emptiness is failure. But emptiness is not the end, it is the interval. It is the moment when old thoughts no longer convince you, but new ones have not arrived yet. And that is frightening, because without the old stories, you lose your identity for a few seconds. Come back with me. What if this emptiness were not punishment, but space? Space is the only place where something new can be born. There is a kind of exhaustion that does not come from the body. It comes from sustaining versions of yourself that are not true. Being strong all the time, being productive all the time, being positive all the time. That is not evolution. It is emotional performance. And when you get tired of acting, the mind becomes quiet. Not because it gave up, but because it no longer wants to lie. Maybe now you realize it. This exhaustion is a request for inner honesty. In the middle of this silence, something small appears, almost shy. It is not a beautiful sentence, it is a simple thought. Maybe the problem is not who I am. Maybe it is what I keep repeating about myself. That does not solve everything, but it changes everything. Because for the first time, you are not fighting life, you are observing it. And observing is the beginning of power. Awareness does not arrive like an explosion, it arrives like a crack. You begin to notice patterns, thoughts that always come before fear, inner phrases that appear before giving up, sensations in the body that warn you when you're about to sabotage yourself. And once you see them, they no longer dominate you in the same way. Even if your mind drifted until now, come back to this. Nothing changes while it is invisible. Everything begins to change when it is seen. This is where something breathed. Silence does not arrive as an answer. It arrives as the absence of noise. At first, this is frightening, because you spent your entire life trying to fill everything. Thoughts, time, gaps, doubts. When the noise fades, the mind looks for something to cling to, an old worry, a familiar fear, anything that brings back the feeling of control. But something has changed. Silence is no longer empty. It has weight. It has density. And within it, you begin to notice details that once went unseen. Thoughts arise, but they no longer arrive shouting. They appear almost shy, as if asking, "May I come in?" And for the first time, you don't respond automatically. Maybe now you realize this. Not every thought is trying to protect you. Some only want to repeat themselves. Silence begins to separate what is essential from what is merely mental habit. You start to notice patterns, the same thoughts at the same hours, the same doubts before the same decisions. And this doesn't create guilt, it creates curiosity. Stay with me for a moment. When you observe without reacting, something inside you relaxes. It's as if the mind says, "So I don't need to run right now?" This is the beginning of real learning. Not the kind that comes from books, but the kind that is born from presence. Silence teaches without words. And when you allow it to remain, it begins to reorganize you from the inside. Before, everything was immediate. Thought became reaction, emotion became decision, fear became retreat. There was no space. Now there is a small space, almost imperceptible, but powerful. It is the space between stimulus and response. You feel the emotion arise, but you don't drown in it. You notice the negative thought, but you don't define yourself by it. This space changes everything, because inside it you breathe. And when you breathe, the body exits defense mode. Maybe now you notice something simple. When the body relaxes, the mind thinks better. Decisions made in a state of alert are usually decisions of survival, not growth. And survival is expensive. It costs opportunities, it costs relationships, it costs money. When you act from space, your choices become cleaner. You say yes less often out of fear, and no less often out of insecurity. This space creates practical emotional intelligence, not theoretical. You begin to realize, if I respond now, I'll regret it. If I wait a little, something clearer will emerge. And it does. It always does. Space is not passivity, it is precision. This is where decisions that change directions are born, including financial ones. Because money does not respond to desperation, it responds to clarity. The first insight is not beautiful, it is honest. It arrives as an uncomfortable whisper. Not everything that passes my mind is true. This sentence doesn't excite, but it frees. Because until now, you believed everything. Every doubt felt like a fact. Every fear felt like a warning. Now, something shifts. You begin to see that thoughts are mental events, not commands. They appear, stay for a moment, and leave if you don't feed them. And this changes the relationship you have with yourself. You stop attacking yourself for thinking wrong and begin to respect yourself for noticing. This insight creates inner maturity, and maturity changes frequency. You spend less energy trying to prove yourself and more energy organizing yourself. You listen more, you observe more, you choose better. And better choices generate better consequences. Not by magic, but by alignment. This insight doesn't shout, it settles in. And once it settles, it begins to operate quietly in every area of your life. Gratitude here is not smiling through pain. It is not denying difficulty. It is not pretending everything is fine. It is something more subtle. It is noticing that despite everything, you are more conscious than before. And that is real progress. Your external life may not have changed yet, but your inner life is no longer the same. And recognizing this changes your posture. You begin to feel grateful not for what you achieved, but for what no longer controls you. Thoughts that once paralyzed you now simply pass. Fears that once commanded you now simply warn. Gratitude arises as a fine internal adjustment. It aligns you with continuity, because a mind that recognizes progress seeks expansion, and expansion creates movement. Movement creates new conversations, new ideas, new financial possibilities. Not because you asked for them, but because you are available. Available to notice, available to act differently, available to receive. Gratitude does not attract things. It adjusts the inner field to sustain what comes. There is a moment when you can no longer unsee. You have seen how it works, how you react, how you create cycles. And even if you still fall sometimes, something is different. You no longer abandon yourself. This is the point of no return. You may repeat old patterns, but now with awareness. And awareness shortens cycles. What once took years now takes weeks, sometimes days. You recover faster, decide more firmly, blame yourself less. And this changes your energy in the world. People feel it. Opportunities respond. Life begins to reorganize around you. Not because you became someone else, but because you returned to yourself. Stay with me just one more moment. It's not that your life completely changed. It's that you changed the point from which you live it. And when the point changes, the path changes. This is where the inner shift settles. And from here, transformation begins to take external form. There is a curious moment. Nothing extraordinary happens outside, but inside, something is different. You wake up and the weight is not as present. It hasn't disappeared, but it no longer commands. The mind doesn't start the day attacking, it observes first. And without you noticing, that changes your posture. Your body stands more upright. Your breath becomes deeper. Your gaze more direct. People feel this, not as exaggerated charisma, but as stability. Stability is a silent language the world understands. Maybe now you notice this. When you are not desperate, things approach more easily. Conversations flow better. Ideas appear out of nowhere. Solutions emerge without excessive effort. It's not luck, it's internal coherence. Aligned energy does not chase, it moves, and the rest responds. For a long time, you associated money with tension, worry, inner conflict. Every bill felt like a judgment, every expense a guilt. But when your mind slows down, your relationship with money changes first on the inside. You begin to look at numbers without exaggerated emotion, no fear, no euphoria, just clarity. And clarity changes behavior. You spend less out of emotional compensation. You value your time more. You begin to see where you were sabotaging yourself. Maybe now you notice something simple. Money flows better to those who do not use it as anesthesia. When the mind is organized, money stops being an escape and becomes a tool. And a well-used tool generates expansion, not immediately, but consistently. Aligned decisions don't make noise. They seem obvious afterward. You say no to something you once accepted out of fear. You say yes to something you once postponed out of insecurity. And the most curious part is this: there is no inner drama. You act calmly. This calm changes outcomes, because decisions made without inner conflict carry less resistance. You begin to notice opportunities that were always there, but you couldn't see them because you were busy surviving. New professional paths, old ideas with a new approach, conversations that once felt intimidating. None of this comes from effort, it comes from space. And space is invisible wealth. Here, it's important to understand something. Money does not respond to desire. It responds to sustained behavior. And behavior is born from the mind. When you change your inner state, your actions become more coherent. You deliver better. You position yourself better. You negotiate better. And the world responds. Sometimes as a raise, sometimes as an invitation, sometimes as an idea that becomes income. The form doesn't matter. The pattern is the same. You stop begging internally and begin allowing externally. Maybe now you notice this. Financial unlocking is not an explosion. It is an unlocking indeed. Something that was stuck begins to turn. There is a feeling that is hard to explain, as if life were accessible. You don't feel that everything is possible, but you feel that something is possible, and that is enough. This feeling changes your relationship with the future. Tomorrow stops being a threat and becomes territory. You begin to plan without anxiety, to dream without guilt, to act without sabotaging yourself along the way. And this creates continuity. Continuity creates stability. Stability creates growth. Stay with me for a moment. It's not that you became rich, it's that you became available to prosper. And that changes everything. You notice something different. Not euphoria, not excitement. Stability. You no longer wake up feeling at war with yourself. The day begins, and you begin with it. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer arrive armed. They come as suggestions, not as sentences. You feel fear sometimes, but you no longer abandon yourself when it appears. Before, fear defined you. Now it only informs you. You no longer need to explain yourself internally all the time. You don't need to convince yourself that you deserve. You begin to act like someone who already respects themselves. And inner respect changes posture, changes tone of voice, changes choices. People feel it, even without knowing how to explain it. You did not return to who you were, because who you were was trying to survive. Now you are learning how to live, without hurry, without proof, without masks. And this creates a silent presence, a presence that sustains decisions, that sustains boundaries, that sustains growth. This is true rebirth, not a leap, but a grounding. There is something curious about life. It responds to coherence. When you begin to sustain yourself from within, the world tests, and then it trusts. Situations appear, responsibilities arise, unexpected invitations arrive, and you no longer feel small in front of them. You breathe, you listen, you respond, without inner drama. Maybe now you realize this. Before, you wanted guarantees. Now you trust your ability to deal. And that changes everything. Life no longer gives you things to test you. It gives them because you can sustain them. Financially, emotionally, energetically. You begin to notice stability where there was once chaos, predictability where there was once fear. Not because everything became easy, but because you became steady. Life trusts those who do not run from themselves. And you stopped running. At some point, you notice this. Money no longer occupies so much space in your mind. It remains important, but it is no longer an obsession. And precisely because of that, it begins to flow better. You make financial decisions with less distorted emotion, less guilt, less compensation. You begin to respect your time, your value, your limits. You see where you were sabotaging yourself, where you accepted less, where you spent to numb. And without judgment, you adjust. Small adjustments create large differences. You don't force growth, you sustain continuity. And continuity is the foundation of real prosperity. Money begins to respond to your inner organization, not as a miracle, but as a reflection. You understand something essential. To prosper is not to accumulate, it is to maintain. And now you maintain. Gratitude is no longer something you do, it is something that happens. It arises when you notice how far you've come, even without an audience, even without applause. You feel grateful because you recognize, not because you were taught. You see how much you changed inside, how much you matured, how much you stopped mentally harming yourself. Even on difficult days, there is a base, a silent confidence, not the one that says everything will work out, but the one that says, I know how to handle this. And that changes your vibration in the world. You no longer beg for validation. You don't shrink to fit. You don't abandon yourself to please. You are whole. And whole people prosper naturally. Now, return to the body. Feel the weight of your body being supported, your breath happening on its own. Notice the space around you, the sounds, the presence. Everything remains as it was, but something in you does not. You learned to observe the mind, to choose responses, to sustain paths. You understood that you were not hostage to thoughts, nor to circumstances, nor to the past. You do not control everything, but now you guide yourself, and that is freedom. Rebirth was not an event, it was a change in inner position. and it continues every time you return to yourself. What part touched you? What within you wants to be reborn today?